So this means that having a foundation in financial literacy matters. Learning matters. Knowing where we might go wrong also matters as much as where we're going right. My name is Lusardi. I am an associate here at Vincent Hirsch Financial Services. And today we're going to take a look at some research and some insights as to what millennials could be doing to better help them on their journey to financial success. Now, we've all heard the rules. Start saving early, avoid bad debt, start investing consistently. Now, we can follow these things, but it's still not uncommon for many millennials to feel behind, feel unsure, and sometimes wonder if they're even doing it right. Today we're going to look at some academic articles and research that kind of help millennials understand what they could be doing and help them understand their money. Now, we're going to go study by study on this and address what it is that the researchers looked at, what it is that they found, and just the question that matters the most, how this applies to me. So we're going to get started with a paper by Anna-Marie Lusardi. In a CFPB-sponsored study, Anna-Marie Lusardi asked millennials a different question than most financial advisors asked. She focused on whether people could meet obligations, so that would be debt repayments like credit cards or rent or car loans, etc., whether or not they feel in control of their finances, and whether or not they could handle financial shocks, such as a medical emergency or car repairs or something to that effect. And what she found was millennials tended to report lower on these financial well-being questions than older adults. Some of the strongest predictors of doing better were some things like having a stable income, avoiding major financial disruptions. So that would mean having some kind of savings, which that's point number 3, is having access to some kind of savings, which is having emergency savings or investment money that you can lean on that's not retirement money, and having some kind of foundational financial literacy. The nuance here is that it's not necessarily about earning more or investing better, it's more about having financial resilience. Now, what can we take away from this study? Before we start chasing high returns or complicated financial strategies, we might want to address the question, if something unexpected happened to me in the next month, would I be able to stomach that? If the answer to that question is a little shaky, we may want to address our financial stability before we address things like chasing investment returns. The stability will help us to improve our confidence and help us to take the steps into creating a more optimal financial situation. So Lusardi tells us that this feeling of uncertainty and insecurity largely comes from lack of buffers or lack of predictability. Another group of researchers asked a different set of questions. They asked, what is it that actually makes millennials follow through on good financial behaviors? This is something that Dewi and her colleagues looked at. They studied millennials and tested whether financial knowledge predicted financial management behavior. What they found was a little surprising. They found that there was not really a strong relationship between financial knowledge and having good financial behavior. What they did find was things like financial attitude and financial skills were better predictors of financial management behavior. So in other words, what is their mindset? What kind of habits have we started to create? And are we able to execute on those abilities? So having this saving mindset or having this longer term vision, building the habits to start saving or address our budget regularly or investing consistently, and having the ability and the discipline to execute on these things, setting up recurring automated savings into our 401ks or our savings accounts, etc., or being mindful of where we spend money. These are the types of things that predicted good financial management behavior rather than just knowing about these things. So this gets the ultimate underlying point where she addresses that financial behavior is usually changed when we do things like automate our bill pay or automate our savings, when we simplify our financial decisions, and when we understand that habits are easier than willpower. So falling into these good financial habits. So maybe it's setting a date of the month where we pay our bills if we don't have auto pay, whether we start to go grocery shopping and we stick to a list rather than going out without one. Having these different habits that we set in the long term help us to create better financial management skills. Now, that's not to say that having financial knowledge does not matter. It absolutely does. And what we see in a study by Kim, Anderson, and Seay, they examine what happens when we separate financial behaviors into short and longer term actions. They found that financial knowledge was positively associated with better behavior in both categories. So having this understanding and this knowledge of personal finance and financial literacy helps us both in the short and the long term address our financial behaviors and adjust our actions. So this means that people who understood and had a grasp of financial literacy were more likely to save money, plan, like engage in some kind of a simple financial plan, even if it wasn't with a professional, invest money such as their 401k or some kind of after-tax investment account, and avoid expensive borrowings. That would be having a car loan that they may not be able to afford, or having a mortgage that they may not be able to afford. Avoiding these expensive borrowing. This may sound like a slight contradiction to the prior point where financial knowledge doesn't exactly predict behavior, but what this means is that it improves the probability of having good action. It's not a one-for-one prediction. It's not exactly a tell-all, but what it does is that it improves the probability, the likelihood of us taking action sooner or having better financial actions, especially if we feel confident and we understand what it is that we're doing. So this means that having a foundation in financial literacy matters. Learning matters. Knowing where we might go wrong also matters as much as where we're going right. So having an objective view of our budget, having an objective view of our emergency savings or our retirement, having a powerful financial position is usually built from understanding the basics like saving or mindful spending, recognizing limits. So that would be like not running a deficiency in our cash flow, understanding our financial limits. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a step back and look at education a bit more broadly with a study from Sherwood. Sherwood compared different generations and looked at whether financial education improved literacy over the long term in life. Now, as we may expect, it did actually improve financial literacy later in life, which means that people who were exposed to some kind of formal financial education scored higher on these reports. Even with this education, this foundation, there were still some financial behaviors that struggled later in life. So even though education raises the floor, it doesn't necessarily eliminate the execution challenges or struggles or biases that we experience on a regular basis. So how do we put all of this together? The study by Lusardi shows us that financial security comes from building some kind of resilience. The study from Dewi and colleagues tells us that having habits and attitudes help to drive action. The study from Kim and colleagues show us that having financial knowledge does improve odds of improving our financial behaviors and our actions. And then Sherwood tells us that education helps to provide the foundation for our financial behaviors later in life. Now, when we put all of these things together, it shows us that financial success usually comes from having an understanding, staying realistic with our goals and our financial picture, reducing friction, so that would mean having automated savings and removing the manual side of a lot of these things, and just keeping a good repetition of our good behaviors. So building out that calendar of maybe paying our bills on the first of every month, or going to the grocery store on a Saturday with a grocery list, or having these different mechanisms in place that help us to build good habits. It's all about building consistency. Consistency over time helps us to make slow, iterative progress that shows dividends later. So rather than asking, am I doing the perfect strategy, we want to make sure that we're addressing the basics, making sure that we have an understanding of what it is that we're looking to accomplish. Is our plan easy to maintain? Can I survive any kind of unexpected financial expenses? And do I know when I should ask for help? If you have all of those bases covered, you're a lot closer than you may already think. The research doesn't say that millennials are necessarily bad with money. It's more a modern financial life that's complicated. And people who win will tend to make good decisions a lot easier. They tend to make them a little more iterative and repeatable. And they're less dependent on motivation and more consistent about what it is that they do. Now, if that's something that we need help building or to help get started, a lot of people rely on family members or partners, financial professionals, or even a lot of apps nowadays have these features that can help us to get on the right foot. So with that, thank you all for watching.